Nuclear danger is knocking at the door in the most realistic scenario. After all, Putin doesn't threaten us with the red button for no reason, right? In the context of the Third World War, which we must agree has already begun, the possibility of a nuclear disaster has to be taken seriously. And here we're not just talking about nuclear weapons that can be activated at the push of a button, but also about nuclear power plants scattered across the globe, which can become collateral victims of wars. In 2023, there were 436 nuclear reactors in operation globally, spread across 32 countries. The United States of America has the highest number of nuclear reactors, totaling 93 units. Also, in 2023, there were 167 nuclear reactors in Europe. Quite a lot, isn't it? Let's consider a hypothetical scenario. What would happen if half of the world's nuclear power plants exploded simultaneously? Well, 436 is quite a number. Let's take only half. It all starts on a beautiful morning in May. You wake up, get out of bed, and look out the window to check the weather. The sun shines into the room, awakening the cat from its sleep. Curiously, it approaches the window to admire the May trees and the completely clear sky. And then, boom! You hear an infernal blast as if the sky has collapsed onto the earth. You don't know what's happening. Your cat has hidden under the bed. A shockwave rushes towards you, shattering all the windows and tearing apart all the trees. Everything happens so quickly that you don't realize what hit you. You rise from a pile of shards, branches, leaves, and debris, and look again through the remaining window to see what's happening. Is it snowing? How? It's May. Above the horizon, a giant mushroom cloud of fire and death rises, changing the landscape to sepia tones. And then you realize, nuclear explosion. You might already be dead, but you don't realize it. Because in your case, death comes slowly and in terrible agony. You've just witnessed what the residents of Chernobyl saw on April 26, 1986. You hurry to pack your bags and move away from the area as far as possible. But you don't know that not just one nuclear power plant exploded, but half of all the plants on the globe. And from here begins the modern apocalypse. All forms of life near the nuclear power plants are instantly annihilated. A circular buffer zone around the plants, with a diameter of 60 kilometers, will not be safe for humans for the next 20,000 years. This means that 2,127 square kilometers around each nuclear power plant will be completely uninhabitable, globally totaling 616,286 square kilometers. Sounds like a lot, but in reality, it is a lot. Over 1% of the planet's 510 million square kilometers. However, only 29.2 of that, namely 149 million square kilometers, are land. We're already in a bad situation, but at least most of the planet is uninhabitable desert. Ice mountains. Only desert is 33%. So we're left with 38 million square kilometers, ultimately 20% of habitable area, because the power plants are in habitable areas, gone, especially you who were near the plant. It's useless to run thinking you'll escape. Stop running, accept your fate. I guess I'd listen to music if my ears still work. I'd eat ice cream. The atmosphere dynamics wouldn't be on our side, as radioactive materials would be released, leading to widespread contamination of soil, water and air. Fortunately, the atmosphere doesn't stay, it's in constant motion. Thus, radioactive isotopes such as cesium, strontium and iodine would spread over distances, contaminating over 200,000 square kilometers in the vicinity of the plant. Obviously, we multiply everything by 218, the number of exploded plants, and we get an impressive value of 43,600,000 square kilometers across the entire globe. Very, very intensely contaminated with isotopes. According to the above calculation, with small errors, you might find a corner of the world that's okay. But don't be sad. The opportunity to test your survival skills arises. Radiation effects infiltrate ecosystems, disrupting delicate ecological balances and causing damage to flora and fauna. Plants farther from the plant absorb radioactive particles, leading to bioaccumulation and biomagnification through the food chain. In short, entire ecosystems collapse right before your eyes. The Northern Hemisphere dies a little more with each passing minute. Would you like some water? Nuclear material has contaminated all sources of water, including seas, oceans, rivers, lakes, and aquifers, even before the first sensation of thirst. Aquatic animals die. Humans perish as well. Water becomes unusable for anything. What made life possible on the planet, namely its natural cycle, becomes a weapon. Water can infiltrate deep into soils, further contaminating lower layers. It's all part of a natural water cycle. Everything is completely destroyed. The problem doesn't stop there. We need to consider that the intensity of radiation would be 100 times greater than that of Chernobyl, because multiple plants would explode simultaneously, releasing radioactive material at the same time. So think about what happened in Ukraine. Everything 100 times more intense, especially in America, Europe, and East Asia. The population is exposed to huge levels of radiation. You wouldn't even need prolonged exposure. The intensity would be so high that you'd instantly develop various types of cancer. Yes, exactly. I'm talking about you, still trying to run away. At least bandage those wounds on your face. And see, you forgot the cat in the apartment. It was a protein-rich snack. The damage to infrastructure is extremely severe. Explosions cause widespread destruction of critical infrastructure, including transportation networks, industrial facilities, power lines, and pipelines. This damage disrupts movement from one place to another and essential services such as electricity, water supply, and telecommunications. But where do you go? Forced evacuation of communities leads to mass displacement of people. Do you have room to squeeze among the 7.8 million inhabitants of Washington, or 11 million in Paris? I think not. Plus, half of them are heading home. They know the way. And the car would be the fastest means of transportation, because I'm pretty sure trains aren't running. Better start digging your grave now than walk. The magnitude of the disaster already overwhelms local and national emergency response capabilities. So, there's no point in struggling. No one's going to help you. You're on your own. The luckiest ones are those further south, not in the inland. They somehow manage to move faster. Considering that all nuclear plants are in the Northern Hemisphere, the wisest decision is to move as far south as possible, to run away from the diagram, meaning Australia, Southern Africa, and South America. But don't think you're completely safe there. First, you need to escape from the radioactive hell of the Northern Hemisphere. It will be quite hard with you already dying. If the southern countries accept you, that is. The large number of population from affected regions strains the reception capacity. After all, no state is obligated to take in refugees. And by the time negotiations are over, the radiation will be so intense that Mr. Biden wouldn't even need to bother. By now you've probably figured out that you're going to die. It was useless to go back for the cat. If you were unlucky enough to be born in Washington or Constanta, what can you do? The entire population of the Northern Hemisphere will die in terrible agony without medical help. But what about those lucky enough to be in the Southern Hemisphere? Do they live long and prosper? We have natural disasters. Explosions release energy. In regions already prone to seismic activity, such as along tectonic plates, they could trigger local earthquakes or amplify existing seismic activity. They can cause landslides, collapses, the destruction of dams and reservoirs. Even if they are in the north, it matters for what I'm about to tell you next. We have earthquakes, and we also have volcanic activity. Eruptions inject large amounts of pyroclastic material into the atmosphere. We have fire. We also have wildfires. Despite authorities risking their lives to help with evacuations, nature ignites and spreads its hell to neighboring areas. On one hand, volcanic eruptions release large quantities of sulfur dioxide, SO2, and aerosols into the atmosphere. Once they reach the stratosphere, sulfur dioxide combines with water vapor to form sulfate aerosols, which reflect sunlight back into space. Do you understand where I'm going with this? In certain parts of the globe, including the south, a temporary drop in temperatures occurs. This cooling is most pronounced in the months immediately following and can persist for several years. depending on atmospheric circulation patterns. Radioactive precipitation contaminates freshwater sources. And now there's a water crisis in the south. And it's also contaminated with radioactive pollutants. It gradually affects agriculture and industry. You can't give people radioactive fruits and vegetables. Not to mention that the influx of refugees makes agriculture even more difficult because there are more mouths to feed. That is, if states are willing to accept you. Remediation efforts to decontaminate water sources are an almost impossible challenge. You'll have to get used to the taste of deer with 5 legs. Species sensitive to radiation, such as fish consumed more, would be particularly vulnerable to the effects of exposure and would indirectly contaminate the population through ingestion. There wouldn't be Netflix and chill even in the south. The radiation would spread across the globe so intensely that nothing would be safe anymore. You could only feed on food made in laboratories. If scientists and researchers found a way to safely reach the south, they could establish centers to help procure food in laboratories. It wouldn't take many years for the extinction of the human race to be successfully accomplished. But the diagram doesn't cover everything. And as shown time and time again in alien movies or Van Damme's films, humanity will survive even if it's not humane for a while.